Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Buddhang Dhammang Sanghang Namasami. Good morning, everyone. So today we'll be looking at the Vattha Sutta, so the simile of the cloth, which is in the Majjhima Nikaya, discourse number 7. So I'll be reading through this sutta and periodically pausing to give some explanation about the meaning of what the Buddha is talking about. So for those who are following this live, at any time, you're welcome to write questions. And if the questions are immediately relevant, then they can be read out when it seems appropriate to read them out. Otherwise, we'll go through them at the end. So starting at the top of this discourse, so the sutta begins, "Thus have I heard, on one occasion the Blessed One was living at Savatthi, at Jeta's Grove, in Anathapindika's park. There the Blessed One addressed the monks. 'Monks!' 'Auspicious sir,' those monks replied to the Blessed One. The Blessed One said this, 'Monks, when cloth is defiled and dirty, then no matter what kind of dye you use, whether it is blue, yellow, red, or crimson, it will appear poorly dyed, and the color will not be pure. For what reason? Monks, because of the impurity of the cloth. In the same way, monks, when the mind is defiled, a bad result is expected.'" So first, just a little word here on etymology. So what's being translated here as a bad result, the Pali is dugati. So du means bad or unpleasant, and gati literally means where you go or destination. And gati often has the specific meaning of your next life, as in your destination after you die. So dugati, bad destination, can mean an unpleasant rebirth. And the opposite, sugati, good destination, can mean a pleasant rebirth, a good rebirth. But it's also sometimes used in just a more general sense of dugati meaning an unpleasant result or an unpleasant condition, and sugati meaning a pleasant result, a pleasant condition. But just keeping in mind that the Buddha here is implying also rebirth. So not just the results we get in this life, but also the results that we get in future lives. So the Buddha continues with this simile. "Monks, when cloth is completely pure and clean, then no matter what kind of dye you use, whether it is blue, yellow, red, or crimson, it will appear well dyed, and the color will be pure. For what reason? Monks, because of the purity of the cloth. In the same way, monks, when the mind is not defiled, a good result is expected." So again, good result here is sugati, which can mean positive rebirth, as well as simply good result. So this is the simile from which the sutta gets its name. So if you start with stained and dirty cloth and you try to dye it, then it won't turn out well. It will still be clearly stained cloth. So in monastic life, we often dye our own robes. And when the robes start to get faded, then we'll just put more dye in the cloth to make it dark again. And it's actually quite noticeable if you're starting with a stained cloth, because often the stain will be even more visible after you re-dye the fabric. So you might have a little spot on your robe, a little stain, and then you go to dye it, and the stain becomes extremely dark and visible. So this is something which, for those of us who routinely re-dye our clothes, the simile is very, very apt. It's something which we all have some experience with. But the Buddha is applying it here to our mind. So in the same way, if we have some kind of uh, impurity or defilement in our mind, then it appears very clearly. We might think that it's not visible, but it is. We might think that it's not apparent, but it is. It's apparent to ourselves and it's apparent to everybody around us. And the results that come from the impurity of our mind then is that everything that we do is tainted by it. Everything that we do is distorted by it. A good example of this is when offering feedback to another person, when offering someone some criticism, some constructive criticism, or some pointers on how they can improve their conduct. So if our mind is full of defilements, if our mind is full of anger and irritation, or if we're offering the criticism from a place of craving, of desire, then often what the other person feels is they feel the force and momentum of that hostility. Or if we're coming from a place of greed, of craving, then the person that we're speaking to might feel that we're speaking from ulterior motives, that we're just trying to get something for ourselves. So then, even if the criticism that we're offering is completely valid, even if it's beneficial, it often won't be received well, because what the other person is noticing is that defiled and impure mind with which we're speaking. They just notice, oh, this person's in a really bad mood. Oh, or they think, oh, this person's really angry. Or they think, oh, I'm being unfairly persecuted by this hostile person. Or they're thinking, oh, this person's trying to take advantage of me and get what they want from me. So then the criticism is not received well. And we can see that from our own experience, how difficult it is to receive constructive criticism if it's delivered in a harsh or self-centered way. But then the flip side of this, so if someone is speaking with a pure mind, if their mind is filled with loving kindness and compassion, and they're offering constructive criticism in a gentle, kind, loving, and caring way, it's much easier for us to accept it. It's much easier for us to hear it and listen to it and take it to heart, because we don't feel that the feedback is tainted by any kind of defilements. We don't feel that it's impure in any way. So this is one example of how when the mind is defiled, we get bad results. And when the mind is pure, we get good results. But you can also see this in many other ways. Another example of this is perhaps when you're cooking, when you're preparing food. If your mind is overcome with anger or with hostility, or it's filled with any of the defilements that the Buddha is about to start listing, then your attention is not on the task of preparing the food, which means that you might make mistakes. You might put in way too much salt or way too much pepper, or not use the right combination of seasonings, or you might cook it too long or too short or too hot or too cold. And then you wind up with something that's not particularly good because we haven't been paying proper attention to the task at hand. So these are just a few examples of how when the mind is filled with defilements, it can ruin even simple, ordinary, everyday tasks. But the Buddha is speaking also in much broader scales here. He's speaking about karma. He's speaking about how every choice that we make with body, speech, and mind creates a corresponding result. So if we act and speak with a defiled and impure mind, then we get stained, damaged results. So this comes right from the beginning of the Dhammapada. So one of the most famous verses of the Dhammapada is the first two verses, where the Buddha says, if one speaks or acts with a defiled mind, then suffering follows. And then similarly, if one speaks or acts with a pure mind, then happiness follows. So then next in the sutta, the Buddha gives a nice long list of some defilements of the mind. So for those who like Pali, the Pali word here for defilement is upakilesa. So the Buddha says, monks, what are the defilements of the mind? So that's chittasa upakilesa, defilements of the mind. Covetous, deviant greed is a defilement of the mind. Aversion, anger, resentment, deprecation, malice, jealousy, stinginess, fraudulence, deceitfulness, stubbornness, hostility, conceit, arrogance, pride, and negligence are defilements of the mind. So one of the wonderful things about the Buddha is that every now and then, actually very often, he'll give lists, which kind of make sure that we're paying attention and that we're catching all the details and nuances of what he's talking about. Often the Buddha gives a simple list: greed, hatred, and delusion. Here he's going into a little more detail about some examples of this. So the first one, what's translated here is covetous, deviant greed. So the Pali word is abhijja, visama, lobha. So abhijja is commonly translated as covetousness. So this wish to possess something, to get something. And visama literally means either uneven in the sense of uneven ground, or unpeaceful. So visama means not peaceful. So visama, it's commonly used in the sense of something which is not the right path, which is not the appropriate way of going. So the simile here is that the proper road to go on is the one that's flat and smooth and level. But when we get off track, then we're going off into the wilderness. We're getting off the well-established road, and we're getting into uneven territory, which is dangerous. It's dangerous to walk on. We might trip or fall or injure ourselves. We might wind up taking much longer than expected. So visama means off the proper path, off the wholesome path. And it also, again, has that connotation of not peaceful. So something which takes us away from a peaceful mind, something which disturbs the peace of our mind. So abhijja, visama, lobha, so covetous, deviant greed is a defilement of the mind. Aversion, that's vyapada. Anger, that's khodha. Resentment, upanaha. Deprecation, makko, so that's like being insulting or diminishing another person's self-worth or sense of value. Malice, palasa in Pali. Jealousy, which is issa. Stinginess, macharya. So stinginess is something which really need to watch out for in our practice. So one of the foundation stones of Buddhist practice is generosity. So dana. So this act of giving to others, of giving material things, if we have material things to give, giving support, giving kindness, giving work. So giving what we can to be of benefit to others. And the flip side of this is stinginess, which is the mind of withholding, the unwillingness to share what we have with others, this self-centered tendency to try to hoard for ourselves what we have. So stinginess is coming from self-centeredness. It's coming from a sense of self-importance. It's coming from a lack of consideration for others. So this is something which we really need to make a conscious effort to counteract and go against as much as possible. So it's commonly said that the first step on the Buddhist path is generosity. But actually the practice of generosity continues to inform every single thing we do. As Venerable Panyavati said, we practice for the benefit of others. So this means that everything we do in our practice is a form of generosity. So why are we training and developing our mind? As an act of generosity to the world, as well as to ourselves. Why are we trying to cultivate wisdom and compassion? As an act of generosity, as a way of caring about all beings. So he continues, fraudulence and deceitfulness. So these go together. So the simple precept that we take every day is not to tell lies. So that's the most blatant form of deceitfulness. But also watching how we try to trick or deceive others all throughout the day in all kinds of subtle and not so subtle ways. Noticing the way that we often have a tendency to distort or bend or alter the truth in order to make ourselves look better, or in order to get what we want, or in order to make other people look worse, or all the ways that we try to distort other people's perceptions of reality in order to achieve our own ends. So if you approach the world with a proper lawyerly mentality, then you can get by without directly breaking any of the 5 precepts, and yet be in complete violation of the spirit and principle of the precepts, which is to do no harm and to bring as much benefit to the world as possible. The next item on the Buddha's list here is stubbornness. So stubbornness is a defilement of the mind. The Pali word here is tampa, which literally means a pillar or a post. So something which is firmly stuck in one place and it's not moving. That's a big problem. So for those who were listening to the talk last night, the theme of the talk last night was impermanence, the fact that everything is constantly changing. Everything is in a state of shift and flux. So that means that we need to be flexible and able to shift and move with things. So if we're not flexible, then when things change, well, one, that's really uncomfortable because we can't shift and change with them. It also makes it more likely that we're going to break under that condition of difficulty. And stubbornness is particularly dangerous in community life when interacting with other people. If we're stuck on our views, the way I want things to be, and the way I prefer things, and the way I insist that that things be considered, then we have no ability to accommodate each other. So it's a very rare set of even 2 people that agree perfectly on everything all the time. Most people have some amount of disagreement and conflict, and that's to be expected. It isn't a problem as long as we have the willingness to accommodate each other, to look after each other. So there's a very beautiful discourse elsewhere in the suttas, which speaks about 3 monks who, in all fairness, they were very well advanced in their practice. They weren't yet fully enlightened, but they were close. So 3 monks who were living together, and the Buddha went and asked them, and he asked them, how is it that you guys are living together so harmoniously? How is it that you get along so well? And they give a list of several reasons why they get along well. But one of the things was, whenever the other 2 monks wanted to do something different, then the monk who had the differing viewpoint would say, why don't I set aside my viewpoint and do what these other venerables want to do instead? And he would set aside his opinion and he would do what the others wanted to do instead. So it's that willingness to be flexible, to accommodate the other people in our lives. And we do need to be wise with this, of course. So if the other people in our lives are encouraging us to break the precepts, well, that's a great chance to be stubborn. So stubbornly insist on following the precepts. If people are trying to convince you to go to the bar instead of practicing meditation this evening, again, be stubborn. Be stubborn about your insistence of not going to the bar. Be stubborn about your insistence on doing your meditation practice.
I believe they shut down the bars, so
Oh,
there is
right.
that.
Yay! So there's no bars anyway.
Side effect of the
But maybe your friends
coronavirus.
want you to do a live stream drinking session, a remote drinking session. So be stubborn on your insistence of doing remote meditation sessions instead. Much better option. So stubbornness here, this also calls to mind another harmful quality which the Buddha speaks about in a number of places, which is sanditi paramasa, which means a stubborn grasping to one's viewpoints and opinions. So an unwillingness to change one's opinions, an unwillingness to even consider that one's views and opinions might be flawed. So this is something which is extremely damaging to the development of one's own mind, because if you're not fully enlightened, then your opinions are wrong. So there's one thing which you can be absolutely certain about, which is that your viewpoints are wrong. Your opinions are wrong. Your beliefs are wrong. Because if they were right, you would be a Buddha. You're not. Therefore, your opinions are wrong. So to be stubbornly insistent on holding to your wrong views is incredibly foolish and will prevent you from making progress on the path. So this is another reason why stubbornness is such a major obstacle to development, because what we're stubbornly holding on to is our defilements and our delusions. What we're stubbornly holding on to is the source of our own misery. How silly is that? I'm guilty of this too, by the way, because I'm not fully enlightened. But it's the willingness to acknowledge that we're stubbornly holding on to something useless and harmful that allows us to start to relax a little bit, to start to relax our grip on our wrong view. Then the Buddha gives a few more examples. So hostility. The Pali word here is saramba, which, in addition to hostility, it also means a quarrelsomeness, like a tendency to get in arguments and fights with other people. So it's not just hostility in the ordinary sense of being grumpy, but it's hostility in the sense of like argumentative, prone to fighting and arguing with other people. So there's a really lovely story. So a student went to the Zen master and said, how can I avoid getting in fights with people? And the Zen master said, well, no matter what the other person says, just say, you're right. And the student says, well, that's really bad advice. And the teacher says, yeah, you're right. Anyway, this is not to be taken literally, but rather it's recognizing that engaging in arguments with other people is usually useless. It's usually counterproductive. There's a value in having productive conversations. There's value in discussion. There's value in calmly, rationally speaking about what one is going through or how one sees the situation, so that we can come to a better mutual understanding. But that's something which needs to be done with a mind of kindness and a genuine willingness to understand the other person's point of view. So if we're approaching argument with the intention of proving that we're right, then we're already on the wrong track. But if we come to it with a genuine interest to better understand each other, then we can make progress. We might still disagree at the end of the discussion, but if we've come to a better understanding of each other, then that's sufficient. That's good enough. So again, hostility or argumentativeness, the tendency to get caught up in argument. Next is conceit, which is mana in Pali. So conceit. So there's many layers of this. So commonly we speak about 4 kinds of conceit. So the first three are the conceit of comparison. So the conceit of superiority, thinking I am better. Second is the conceit of inferiority, thinking I am worse. Third is the conceit of equality, thinking I am equal. So these three are all examples of conceit of comparison, where we're comparing ourselves to others, thinking I am better than that person, I am worse than that person, I am equal to that person. So these are all ways that we get caught up in attaching to a solid sense of self-identity, thinking I am these particular qualities, I am these particular traits, and then comparing that to a solid sense of other people's identity. And that other person has such and such traits and qualities, and I am either better, worse, or equal than them based upon this comparison of traits and qualities. But this is absurd because our traits and qualities are impermanent. Like everything else, they're constantly changing. They're not who we ultimately really are. They're just temporary qualities which come and go, which rely upon conditions, and which change and disappear when those conditions change. And similarly, the other person that we're interacting with, their qualities and traits are similarly impermanent and subject to change. So we're comparing one mirage to another mirage. We're comparing one illusion to another illusion. There's nothing solid or real whenever we compare ourselves to others. We're comparing one delusion to another delusion. That's all. The fourth kind of conceit is the conceit I am. The conceit of self-existence. The conceit of believing that we exist as independent, separate, ongoing beings. This is much more deeply rooted in the mind, and it's much more challenging to see. And in fact, it's not something which we break through until full enlightenment. So if that one seems particularly challenging to you, don't worry, you're not alone. It's challenging to everyone. So we start by working with the more obvious forms of conceit. And eventually, when the time is right, then we can break through the conceit of self-existence. The next one on the list is arrogance. Arrogance and pride. So arrogance in particular is, it's like the conceit of superiority. But in particular, arrogance is this excessive pride in one's own perceived good qualities. And that's usually coupled with a diminishing of the worth of other people. So thinking that one is better than other people. So it's interesting that the Buddha mentioned this separately. So mana is conceit. Atimana is translated here as arrogance. So the prefix ati means excessive. So atimana, excessive conceit, over the top conceit. So ati has this meaning of over the top, like way too much, like utterly ridiculously excessive. And that's the quality with this mind of arrogance. It's just utterly ridiculous. It's over the top. It's excessive. The only person in the entire world who has the right to be arrogant is the Buddha. But he's not arrogant at all because he has no self-centeredness left. So by the time you actually have the right to be arrogant, you no longer are capable of being arrogant because you've destroyed all self-centeredness. So the rest of us have no right to be arrogant because we're just as full of defilements as everybody else. So again, it's worth noting that the Buddha, by including both mana and atimana, conceit and arrogance, he's underlining how dangerous and destructive it is to get caught up in arrogance and this sense of self-superiority. The next quality, which is translated here as pride, the Pali word is mada, which can mean pride, but it also has the meaning of intoxication. So intoxication here, not necessarily meaning intoxicated with alcohol and chemicals and so on, but also the way that we get obsessed with things. So like getting overly excited about things to the point where we lose our sense of perspective, to the point where we lose our sense of what's really important, to where we get so caught up in something that we make bad choices, we make foolish decisions, we lose our mindfulness, we lose our self-restraint. So Madda, it's translated here as pride, but obsessiveness might be a better translation. The tendency that we have to get obsessed with sensuality, or get obsessed with our youth, or get obsessed with our health. So the Buddha speaks about, elsewhere in the suttas, he speaks about the intoxication with youth, the intoxication with health, the intoxication with life. And it's the same word madda, the same word which means either pride or intoxication. And the final quality on the list that he gives, translated here as negligence, is pamada. So pamada is a defilement of the mind. Pamada, again, it can mean negligence or heedlessness. So not paying attention to what we're doing, not paying attention to the effects and consequences of the choices that we're making. So neglecting the consequences of our actions, neglecting the consequences of our choices. And this is another extremely harmful thing to be caught up in. So neglecting the consequences of our choices. So the Buddha said over and over in the suttas, he says that karma is intention. So karma is why we're doing what we're doing. So then sometimes we justify negligence by saying, well, I'm not intentionally causing harm. And that's true, if you're not intentionally causing harm. But you are intentionally neglecting the harm that is coming about as a result of your actions. You are intentionally neglecting the damage that's done by the choices that you're making. So this is where we use delusion and willful ignorance in order to justify making harmful choices. Is we can tell ourselves, oh, well, I'm not intentionally causing harm. But what we are doing is we're still causing harm by negligence. We're causing harm by not carefully considering what we're doing and the consequences of those choices. So many places in the suttas, the Buddha talks about the importance of consideration, of carefulness, of really making an effort to consider, what am I doing and how does it affect people? How does it affect me and how does it affect the others in my life? So that we can make an informed decision about what the proper course of action is, so that we can make a decision about what course of action will bring the most benefit and the least harm. So again, watching out for the tendency towards negligence, and instead cultivating consideration, cultivating a full attentive awareness, not just of what we're doing and why we're doing it, but also of the implications and consequences of what we're doing. So that's the list of upakalesas, of defilements that the Buddha gives here. So then he carries on. Monks, when a monk has recognized that covetous, deviant greed, aversion, anger, resentment, deprecation, malice, jealousy, stinginess, fraudulence, deceitfulness, stubbornness, hostility, conceit, arrogance, pride, and negligence are defilements of the mind, he abandons them. When a monk has recognized that covetous, deviant greed, aversion, anger, resentment, deprecation, malice, jealousy, stinginess, fraudulence, deceitfulness, stubbornness, hostility, conceit, arrogance, pride, and negligence are defilements of the mind and has abandoned them, then he has unwavering confidence in the Buddha. He is the Blessed One, the Arhat, the fully self-awakened one, perfect in knowledge and conduct, sublime, the world knower, the unsurpassable trainer of trainable people, the teacher of celestial and human beings, the Buddha, the Blessed One. He has unwavering confidence in the Dhamma. The Blessed One's Dhamma is well expounded, visible, timeless, tangible, a guide, personally experienceable by the wise. He has unwavering confidence in the Sangha of the Blessed One's disciples that has practiced well, that has practiced honorably, that has practiced methodically, that has practiced appropriately. That is, the 4 pairs, the 8 kinds of individuals. This is the Sangha of the Blessed One's disciples, which is worthy of support, worthy of hospitality, worthy of generosity, and respectable, an unsurpassable field of merit for the world. So what the Buddha is implying here is that when one makes a conscious effort to recognize these defilements of the mind and to overcome them, to abandon them, then naturally what arises is deep, unshakable faith in Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. So deep, unshakable faith that the Buddha was fully enlightened, that the Buddha had perfect knowledge and behavior, that the Buddha was the perfect teacher. One has unshakable confidence in the Dhamma, that the Dhamma that was taught by the Buddha is something which is immediately relevant, something which we can see in every time and place, something which can guide us to awakening. So this comes from practicing what the Buddha taught. So this deep faith in Buddha and Dhamma comes from practicing the Buddha's Dhamma, from living the Buddha's Dhamma, from feeling the results that come from following the Buddha's teachings. And it's interesting here that at this point, he's only talking about when one has abandoned the defilements of the mind. So he's not talking about cultivating samadhi. He's not talking about practicing vipassana or cultivating deep insight. He's just talking about seeing our defilements and making an effort to relinquish them, making an effort to abandon them. And I say just because that's actually phenomenally difficult. It's extremely challenging. Even when we know that these defilements are harmful, we still get wrapped up in them. We still get lost in them. Because there is admittedly something delicious about them. There's something oddly appealing about all of these defilements. Even though they're painful, even though they cause us no end of suffering and turmoil and agitation and anxiety, there's still something oddly appealing about them. So we keep coming back to them again and again and again. One of the similes that my preceptor, Ajahn Pasno, says is, we're like a dog that goes back to eat its own vomit. Over and over and over again. And so recognizing that even though we know these defilements are disgusting and harmful, we keep indulging in them. Over and over again. Isn't that absurd? Isn't that silly? Kind of adorable, actually, that we're so silly. It's also disgusting, but it's adorable. In that dog eating its own vomit kind of way. And also he speaks about confidence in the Sangha. And here he's using the standard definition of the Sangha, which is referring to those people who have attained at least the first stage of awakening. This is not Sangha in the more general sense of all monastics everywhere, but rather it's specifically referring to the Sangha of awakened beings. So those who've made some progress on the path, some distinct stage of attainment. Because also when we make a conscious effort to relinquish and overcome the defilements of the mind, then we recognize that it's possible to purify the mind. It's possible to have a pure mind, a mind which is free of depression and anxiety, a mind which is free of hostility and anger, a mind which is free of greed and obsession, a mind which is free of arrogance and pride. It's possible to cultivate a mind which is filled with compassion. It's possible to cultivate a wise, gentle, loving mind. So when we see that in ourselves, then we know without any doubt that awakening is possible. When we see that we've purified our own mind, even to a limited extent, then we know that it's possible to purify the mind completely. It's just a matter of time. Once you've cleaned one corner of the cloth, then you know that the whole cloth can be cleaned. Then the sutta continues. When there is discarding, rejecting, releasing, abandoning, and relinquishing to this extent, that is, when one has discarded, rejected, released, abandoned, and relinquished these defilements of the mind, some more fun things from etymology here. So the word translated as discarding here is chatta, which comes from the same root as chaga, which means generosity. So giving away, giving up. So there's also that implication that by abandoning the defilements of the mind, one is practicing generosity for the world. You're giving a gift to the world by training the mind in this way. The second one, what's translated here as rejecting, the Pali word is Vattha, which literally means vomited. As in you vomited up all these horrible things from your mind. So this also is quite relevant in that if you eat something poisonous, then what does your body do? It recognizes this is poisonous and it tries to expel it from the body. Because by expelling it from the body, one can prevent further harm and restore one's health, restore one's good health of body. So it's the same. When we recognize that our mind is filled with poisonous things, then we vomit them out of our mind. We expel them from our mind. We reject them from the mind. Because we don't want to be poisoned by them. We don't want to be burned by them. So releasing mutta, so letting go. Abandoning pahina. Pahina means like casting aside, leaving behind. Patinissatang, so relinquishing. So when one has discarded, rejected, released, abandoned, and relinquished to this extent, so all these defilements, then with the thought, I have unwavering confidence in the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, one acquires knowledge of the meaning, that is the meaning of the Dhamma, knowledge of the Dhamma, and joy connected with the Dhamma. When one is joyful, rapture arises. So rapture here is piti, which these days I usually translate as euphoria. So euphoria is this incredibly pleasant sensation of body and mind. It's this incredibly pleasant experience which fills your whole body and mind. Let's see, when one is joyful, rapture arises. When one has a rapturous mind, is that correct? Yeah, when one has a rapturous mind, the body becomes tranquil. One who has a tranquil body experiences happiness. When one is happy, the mind becomes concentrated. So this last phrase here, when one is happy, the mind becomes concentrated. In Pali, that's sukhino chittang samadhiyati. This is an extremely important thing to keep in mind because it emphasizes the importance of happiness in our practice. It emphasizes the fact that happiness is not just a result that comes later on, but it's also something that we intentionally try to cultivate and develop as part of our practice. It's something which actively supports the development of samadhi, actively supports the development of concentration, which actively supports the foundation of stability in the mind that makes it possible for us to see clearly into our delusions and break through them. And here the Buddha is laying out a basic progression here. So one starts by discarding one's coarser defilements, the more obvious defilements of mind, and developing faith in Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. And actually he says that the faith arises naturally in Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha as a result of relinquishing one's defilements, one's coarse defilements. So one relinquishes one's coarse defilements, faith in Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha arises. With faith in Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, one gets joy connected with the Dhamma. So joy based on an understanding and experience of the Dhamma. So from that joy, there comes euphoria. From euphoria, there's tranquility and happiness. And from that comes concentration. So often people say that their samadhi is very bad. They have a really hard time developing concentration. How can they get better concentration? Well, it's interesting because here the Buddha doesn't say anything at all about meditation methods. Rather, he's talking about the foundations of samadhi, which have nothing whatsoever to do with what your meditation method is or how you're practicing when you're in the meditation hall. It starts with abandoning your coarse defilements, the arising of faith in Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, finding joy in the Dhamma, so delighting in the Dhamma. And that delight in the Dhamma then becomes the basis for concentration, becomes the basis for a joyful, peaceful, happy mind, which is what allows samadhi to arise naturally. Let's see, where are we? And it says, and this is a bit repetitive, but this is what we have in the text. With the thought, there is discarding, rejecting, releasing, abandoning, and relinquishing to this extent. One acquires knowledge of the meaning, knowledge of the Dhamma, and joy connected with Dhamma. When one is joyful, rapture arises. When one has a rapturous mind, the body becomes tranquil. One who has a tranquil body experiences happiness. When one is happy, the mind becomes concentrated. So the difference here is that in the previous paragraph, one is directing one's mind towards faith in Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, which then is a basis for happiness, which is the basis for concentration. Here, one is directing one's mind to awareness that one has abandoned one's coarse defilements. And awareness that one has abandoned one's coarse defilements then produces joy connected with the Dhamma, which then is the basis for the peaceful, happy mind, which can become concentrated. Mm-hmm. So this here is two ways of developing samadhi. So elsewhere, the Buddha talks about these separately as meditation objects. So one is Buddhanusati, so recollection of the Buddha, Dhammanusati, recollection of the Dhamma, Sanghanusati, recollection of the Sangha. So any one of those three can be practiced as a way of bringing joy to the mind, which then here is the basis for concentration. The second one, so recollecting that one has abandoned one's defilements to some extent, that's recollection of one's own goodness. So silanusati, recollection of one's own goodness, one's own purity, one's own morality, one's own wholesomeness, which also is a basis for happiness, which leads to concentration. Then the Buddha continues, monks, if a monk has this virtue, this Dhamma, and this wisdom, then even if he eats refined alms food with many sauces and condiments, it is not an impediment for him. Monks, just as when a defiled and dirty cloth enters clear water, it becomes completely pure and clean. or when gold enters a furnace, it becomes completely pure and clean. In the same way, monks, if a monk has this virtue, this Dhamma, and this wisdom, then even if he eats refined alms food with many sauces and condiments, it is not an impediment for him. In other words, when one's mind is purified to this extent, then the ordinary daily experiences that we have, no matter how pleasant they are, we won't become obsessed with them. So they won't prevent us from making progress on the path. Or similarly, he doesn't mention it here, but similarly, no matter how unpleasant your daily experience is, also your mind won't be obsessed with it. And will be able to continue making progress on the path without being caught up in obsession with either pleasure or pain. Then the Buddha continues, he dwells having pervaded one direction with a mind endowed with loving kindness, likewise the second, the third, and the fourth. So above, below, around, and everywhere, to all as to himself, he dwells having pervaded the entire world with a mind endowed with loving kindness, abundant, expansive, immeasurable, without hostility, and without aversion. So here the Buddha is recommending then practicing loving kindness. In fact, he seems to imply that this is a natural development when one has purified the mind, when one has faith in Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, when one has joy connected with the Dhamma and samadhi starts to arise, then the mind of loving kindness is a natural step from that. It's a natural extension of that. And he speaks here about cultivating a mind of loving kindness that is abundant, expansive, and immeasurable. So these are three qualities to keep in mind when we're doing loving kindness meditation. So we're not trying to cultivate a little tiny bit of metta, and we're trying to cultivate abundant metta. We're not trying to have a narrow, contracted metta. We're trying to have expansive metta. We're not trying to have metta which is just limited in its extent, but something that is immeasurable, something which is vast. Also, he emphasizes here, again, to all as to oneself. So first off, to all. So that means we're not leaving anybody out. So even if there's a particular politician who you've got some irritation with, maybe because they've been making really bad choices over the last few weeks. So you might be able to think of a few politicians like that, maybe. Even so, we wish for them to be happy. We wish for them to be safe, just as everybody else. So we don't leave anybody out. If there's holes in our metta, then it's not very effective. It's kind of like if you have a glass of water with a hole in the bottom. You're like, well, the glass is mostly solid. It's mostly pretty good. But nonetheless, no matter how much water you try to put in the glass, it will just drain out. So it's the same. If there's holes in our metta, may everyone be happy except him. Well, then our metta will just drain out. It won't stay in the mind. It won't get a foothold in the mind. It will just keep leaking away, just as quickly as we try to develop it. So there can't be any holes in our metta. It has to be completely universal. And that also means that we can't leave ourselves out. So to all is to ourselves. So many people, their problem with metta is that they have one big hole right at the middle of their metta, themselves. So wishing may everyone else be happy leaves one big hole right in the middle of the glass. And all the metta will just leak out through that hole. So the mind will not become completely filled and suffused with metta. That said, if you can have metta for other people, that's a lot better than not having any at all. So some of us have the opposite problem, that we have a hard time having loving kindness for others. So we always start with what's available to us. We start with what's easy to us. So if we can cultivate loving kindness for anyone, that's a start. That's great. Keep working on that. But when you feel the time is right, which it is, it's the right time, then we open it up. We allow it to be completely limitless and universal. encompassing everyone without exception. Then the Buddha lists the other three divine mind states, Brahmaviharas. He dwells having pervaded one direction with a mind endowed with compassion. So that's karuna. With sympathetic joy. So that's mudita. So mudita is the delighting in the good fortune that people are experiencing. And with equanimity. So that's upekkha. And for each one of these, he goes through the same list. So above, below, around, and everywhere, to all as to oneself, pervading the entire world with a mind endowed with compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity, abundant, expansive, immeasurable, without hostility and without aversion. So one cultivates the four divine mind states. He understands there is this, there is the inferior, there is the superior, there is a further escape from this perception. In other words, one recognizes that to develop samadhi, so to overcome one's coarse defilements, to cultivate faith in Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, to have joy connected with the Dhamma, to get some samadhi, to practice the four Brahmaviharas, there is these sorts of ordinary practices, and these practices do bring a certain amount of happiness and peace. We know that there is the inferior, so there's living with a mind filled with defilements. That's definitely inferior to practicing as the Buddha has described so far. But there's also the awareness that there is something superior. There's the awareness that even with this degree of purity of mind, with this cultivation of faith, of samadhi, of loving kindness, and so on, we're still not fully awakened. There's the awareness that even at this point, there's still more to be done. So he says, there is a further escape from this perception. Let me just check what the Pali here is. Ati imasa sanyagata sa uttring nisarananti. So sanyagata means like this domain of perception, this domain of awareness. So knowing that there is a higher escape. There is something which is even more sublime than a mind filled with loving kindness. Knowing and seeing in this way, so the Buddha continues, knowing and seeing in this way, his mind is liberated from the corruption of sensuality, the corruption of existence, and the corruption of ignorance. So corruption here is a translation of the Pali word asava. So asava is translated in many different ways in different places. Often it's translated as taint, sometimes as defilement or pollution. Sometimes it's translated as influx or outflow or other less useful words. So here it's translated as corruption, which is pointing to the essence of the asavas. So the asavas are things that corrupt our mind. They're things that pollute our mind, things that taint and defile our mind. So in this sense, asava is similar to kilesa in meaning defilement. And here we have a list of three asavas. So the corruption of sensuality, so kamasava, the tendency to be corrupted by our craving for sensual experiences, by our reactivity to sensual experiences. The corruption of existence, so that's the tendency to be corrupted by the craving for certain kinds of being, for existing in a particular way. So wanting to be normal is bhavasava. It's the corruption of existence, the corruption of wanting to be something in particular. Or wanting to be weird. Well, that's also bhavasava. That's the wanting to be something in particular. So we have to be willing to abandon both wishing to be normal and wishing to be weird, because you are what you are. And fortunately, that's not your true self because you don't have one. But you are what you are, and that's perfectly okay, whatever it is. And often also with states of being and becoming, they're often based upon comparison to others. Not always, but often they're based upon some evaluation of ourselves in comparison to others. Or they're based upon some evaluation of what we think things should be, or what we think is valuable, or what we think is worthwhile. But that's just our own delusions. The only kind of existence that's worth seeking is purity. The only kind of existence that's worth seeking is awakening. And awakening itself is freedom from existence. It's freedom from the limitations of wanting to be this or wanting to be that. And finally, the corruption of ignorance, avijja asava. So avijja fundamentally is not understanding the true nature of reality. So it's not understanding the Four Noble Truths, which is the way that we create our own suffering moment by moment through desire and delusion. Avijja is not recognizing the three characteristics, not recognizing that all things are impermanent, unsatisfying, and impersonal. So this is avijja. And when we're corrupted by this kind of ignorance, then we make really bad choices. We get wrapped up in our cravings because we think that craving makes us happy when actually it makes us unhappy. We get wrapped up in the delusion of permanence, trying to hold on to things, even though it's impossible to hold on to anything. We get wrapped up in trying to seek happiness in things that are inherently unsatisfying. And most insidious is that we cling tightly to a sense of self. We cling tightly to who we think we are, when actually that's just a bunch of impermanent components. It's not who we really are. So this is avijjasava, the corruption of ignorance. So then the Buddha continues. When there is liberation, there is the knowledge of liberation. In other words, when one is freed from all defilement and delusion, then one knows that one is free. This is a very important point. This might seem like a relatively minor statement, but it's actually a very important point. There's one example that's coming to mind of a person who had a very fascinating experience during meditation. And then several months later, they were reflecting on this and they were like, oh, that must have been when I attained full enlightenment. It must have been when I had that fascinating experience a few months ago. But actually, if it was full enlightenment, then he would have known immediately. There would not have been a delay of several months. He would have known right on the spot without the slightest trace of doubt. This is full enlightenment. So this is an important point because there's many practitioners who have wild and crazy experiences in their meditation, and then months later or sometime later, they manage to convince themselves that they've attained enlightenment. But the Buddha is very clear here. The moment you attain full enlightenment, you know exactly what it is, without the slightest trace of doubt or confusion. Then he continues. He understands birth is eliminated, the spiritual life has been completed, what was to be done has been done, there will not be another life here. Monks, this is called a monk who is cleansed by means of internal cleansing. So first he gives one of the standard descriptions of an enlightened being. So one who understands birth is eliminated, so that means that they're no longer caught within a cycle of rebirth. The spiritual life has been completed. In other words, they've reached the highest spiritual perfection, highest possible goal of the spiritual life. What was to be done has been done. So they've completed the task of practice. They've finished the goal. They finished the spiritual practice. And this last part in Pali, it's naparang itataya, which literally means there will not be another experience of here. There will not be another experience of this. So this means that there will be no more experience of delusional existence. One is no longer trapped in the cycle of delusion and suffering. So he says, this is a monk who is cleansed by means of internal cleansing. So in other words, one has completely purified one's own mind, purified one's own heart. So next we have a little incident which gives you a glimpse of some of the spiritual beliefs that were held in ancient India at the time, and which were, some of which are still present, still practiced to this day. On this occasion, the Brahmin Sundarika Bharadvaja was seated not far from the Blessed One. He said to the Blessed One, "Does Sir Gotama go to bathe in the river Bahuka?" So here, the fact that he refers to the Buddha not as the Buddha or the Blessed One, but instead as Sir Gotama, Mr. Gotama, indicates that this Brahmin was not himself a practicing Buddhist, because no Buddhist would refer to the Buddha in such a common way. And the Buddha says, "Brahmin, what is the river Bahuka? What will the river Bahuka do?" The Brahmin replies, "Sir Gotama, the river Bahuka is considered by many to be liberating, to be meritorious. Many people wash away their harmful karma in the river Bahuka." So this is referring to the belief which is still present to this day in India, but also in some other places in the world and some other religions in the world, that there are rivers or lakes which cleanse not only your body but also your mind, where you can wash away your bad karma by bathing in these holy or sacred rivers. And the Buddha was completely opposed to this. He was very clear that, as he says here, he says, "What will the river Bahuka do?" In other words, how can a river wash away your defilements? How can a river cleanse your mind? So the Buddha then, then the Blessed One spoke to the Brahmin Sundarika Bharadvaja using these verses. Bahuka, Adhikaka, Gaya, Sundarika, Saraswati, Payaga, and the river Bahumati. So these are all rivers which were considered holy or sacred by the Brahmins at that time in ancient India. A fool may constantly jump in, but his dark karma will not be purified. What will the river Sundarika do, or Payaga, or Bahuka? If a man has done hostile or cruel actions, that will not purify his harmful karma. So here he's just emphasizing that bathing in these so-called sacred rivers will not do anything to cleanse your mind or to wipe away the effects of the bad choices that we've made. Then the Buddha says, "For one who is pure, it is always a sacred festival. For one who is pure, it is always a holy day." I actually really love this little phrase here. So if you want to go on holiday, well, make your mind a holiday. Make your mind a holy place. Then every day is a holiday. Every day is a celebration. Every day is a joyful occasion. For one who is pure and has pure karma, one attains the completion of one's practice. So completion of one's practice, again, means awakening, full enlightenment. Bathe in this Brahman and produce safety for all beings. If you speak no lies, harm no beings, take nothing that is not given, if you have faith and are free of stinginess, what would you do if you went to Gaya? Any well can be Gaya for you. When this was said, the Brahmin Sundarika Bharadvaja said to the Blessed One, "Wonderful Sir Gotama, wonderful Sir Gotama. Sir Gotama, just as one might set upright what has been overturned, or reveal what has been concealed, or explain the path to one who is confused, or bring an oil lamp into the darkness so those with eyes can see. In the same way, Sir Gotama has revealed the Dhamma in many ways. I go for refuge to Sir Gotama and to the Dhamma and to the monastic community. May I receive the going forth in the Blessed One's presence. May I receive full ordination." So apparently this Brahmin was so convinced by the Buddha's teachings that he decided to become a Buddhist monk. The Brahmin Sundarika Bharadvaja received the going forth in the Blessed One's presence, and he received full ordination. Not long after his ordination, while living alone, withdrawn, vigilant, ardent, and diligent, he directly realized for himself the conclusion of the spiritual life, the right goal that good people go forth from the household life to homelessness for. He knew birth is eliminated, the spiritual life has been completed, what was to be done has been done, there will not be another life here. Venerable Bharadvaja became one of the Arhats. So a couple points on this. First off, it says not long after ordination. We don't know how long that was. So don't get disheartened if you've been practicing for a couple decades and you're still not enlightened. It takes a while. So not long after his ordination, we don't know how long that was. So in Buddhism, we often measure time in terms of eons. So actually even 50 years would count as not long. The other thing is we also don't know what the Brahmin Sundarika Bharadvaja was doing prior to becoming a monk. He may have already been a good practitioner in many ways who just had some persisting wrong views, such as his wrong view that bathing in a holy river can wash away karma. So it might be that he already had made a lot of progress on the path. He might also have been practicing for many, many lifetimes. So when we see someone who seems to attain enlightenment very quickly, it's never quick. We just aren't aware of how much practice they did before that point. So that's the end of this sutta. Do we have any questions? Please.
Thank you, Bhante. We have quite a few questions. So first of all, Cam and Andre say hello. Good morning.
Hello, Cam and Andre.
And then Augusto asks, how to overcome, deal with the feeling of now I can take a vacation from the practice when there is the feeling of bliss? Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Yeah, so taking a vacation from the practice is kind of like saying, I want to go back to torturing myself. So just phrase it in that way in your mind. When you think, I want to take a vacation from the practice, just rephrase it. I want to resume torturing myself. And if it still seems like a good idea, then go right ahead. But you'll probably find that actually doesn't sound very appealing. Nonetheless, because our habits are strong, you might find that you still go ahead and resume torturing yourself, in which case, be aware that that's what you're doing. So when you take a break from the practice, see how painful it is. See how unpleasant it is. See how destructive it is. And then next time, you'll be less likely to discard your self-restraint. Okay.
Thank you.
Next question.
Next question, Matthew asks, do the suttas speak of different types of degrees of greed? For example, can you have non-covetous, non-deviant greed, which would not be a defilement? Deviant, I think you pronounce it. Deviant, okay.
There are different degrees of greed. There's different qualities of greed and desire. And there is, in fact, desire for the wholesome. So you might have a strong desire to be pure. You might have a strong desire to be kind, a strong desire to be generous. So those are forms of desire, but they're desire that points one towards the path instead of away from the path. So in that sense, they're not deviant. There's still forms of desire. So there's still a certain amount of internal agitation that accompanies them, but they are in line with the Dhamma, and they result in progress along the path. Therefore, those forms of desire are wholesome. They're things which lead us in the right direction. For example, the Buddha, in a few places, he speaks about Dhamma Chanda. So chanda is commonly translated as interest or desire or zeal. So that's desire for the Dhamma, interest in the Dhamma, zeal for the Dhamma. In a handful of places, he also talks about Dhamma Raga. So raga normally is a very negative word in Buddhism. Normally it means lust or passion. So Dhamma Raga, a lust for the Dhamma, a passion for the Dhamma. So that same like intense burning desire and attachment that we associate with words like lust and passion. We can have that same intense burning desire for the Dhamma itself, that same powerful passion for the Dhamma. And that also is something which helps us make progress along the path. And eventually, as our practice develops, then that burning passion will start to cool off. Will start to simmer down and become more settled and peaceful. But there is a time and a place where that intense passion for the Dhamma is exactly what we need in order to fuel our practice. Okay, next question.
Thank you. So Cam asks, monitoring my own mind, actions, and words against this list, it feels so doomed because I have all these defilements. How to be aware, but also positive about practicing?
Notice your improvements. Notice the times when your mind is free of defilements. Even just a little bit, even just for a short period of time, even if it's just one. Maybe you wake up one day and you're like, okay, let's check the list. Covetous, deviant greed. Yep, I've got that one. Check. Aversion. Yep. Anger. Yep. Resentment. Yep. Deprecation. Actually, no, I don't feel like insulting anyone right now. Yay! So delight in the fact that at least one of these items is not present in the mind. And actually, if you look at your mind repeatedly in this way, then you'll find that actually much of the time, one or more of these defilements are not present. So delight in the absence of a defilement. And that will help to give you confidence. And also, even when it's present, check to see, well, how strong is it? Often just stopping to examine the defilement already weakens it because we're no longer directly fueling it. We're no longer directly participating. So don't worry if it seems like your mind is overcome with defilements. Well, recognize that you're aware that your mind is overcome with defilements, which means that you've got some amount of wisdom and some amount of self-awareness. Recognize that you know that the defilements are unwholesome. Again, that means you've got some wisdom. Recognize that you have an interest in letting go of your defilements. That means you've got right intention, which means you're practicing the Noble Eightfold Path. So when we reflect in this way, we realize that actually we've got a lot of good qualities. And that if we keep nurturing and fueling those good qualities, then the defilements will start to weaken and dissolve. Okay, next question.
Yeah. And Cam asks another question. Did the Buddha say anything about how past karmas in this life and previous lives shape current defilements and how to overcome long history of past karmas?
Yeah, briefly speaking, the Buddha says, whatever we repeatedly do with the mind becomes the tendency of the mind. So if now we have a strong tendency towards anger, for example, it's because for a very long time we have repeatedly built up our anger. And that's why it's so strong these days. Which also means that if we constantly, consciously make an effort to weaken and reduce our anger, then as time goes by, that tendency towards anger will become weaker and weaker and weaker. So we can use these principles of karma both to explain what we're currently experiencing and also as a roadmap for how to improve our situation. Is there anything else to the question?
I think you covered it.
Okay.
How to overcome long history of past karmas, and the Buddha say anything about how past karmas shape current.
Okay.
Thank
Next
you.
question, please.
And I believe this is Mehmet. Thank you very much. I would like to ask, how is the decision and ability to abandoning the defilements and conducting wholesome actions not conditioned?
Well, I never said it's not conditioned, because in fact it is conditioned. So I don't quite understand what the question is getting at here. The Noble Eightfold Path is conditioned. It's a conditioned phenomenon. It's sankharas like everything else. But it's sankharas that lead to an understanding of the unconditioned. It's a sankata, a conditioned phenomenon, that leads to understanding the asankata, that which is beyond conditions. So yeah, all of our practice is conditioned. All of our practice is sankharas. But it's sankharas that lead to understanding that which is beyond sankhara. Okay?
Thank you. And Mehmet also asks, is abandoning an independent act of free will? Is abandoning an independent act of free will? If so, what is the source of that free will? If it is also a conditioned result, how can there be decision and how can they be judged?
Too much thinking. Next question.
That's very Zen answer, Bante. So Luno, Judy, and Jen saying hello, good morning.
Hello, Yudi and Jen.
And Jen asks, does a lay follower need special permission or training to recite medicine Buddha or green Tara mantras? I want to say them for the world, but not sure if I'm allowed.
Well, first off, I should say that I have not been formally trained in Vajrayana Buddhism. So the forms of Buddhism that I study and practice are exoteric, which means that they are forms of Buddhism where all the teachings are publicly available and all the practices are publicly taught, which means that everybody is authorized to practice them. So my answer from that perspective would be that there's no problem. And in particular, also the mantra practices are usually publicly available anyway. But yeah, I would say that if you want to recite medicine Buddha mantras or green Tara mantras and dedicate them to the well-being of the world, that's a wonderful thing to do. That's a great way to cultivate wholesome mind states. It's a great way to develop the wish for all beings to be happy, healthy, and safe. So as long as you stay focused on that intention while you do the recitations, then yeah, that's a wholesome way to develop the mind of practice. So yeah, I don't see a problem here.
All right, thank you. And I think that was the last question, unless another question pops up. And Ramoy says hello, and he also says, "I'm glad to see. I'm glad to see you're cutting through spiritual materialism."
Working on it.
All right. Well, there's no other questions, it seems. So I think that's the end for this sutta study. But since we're dedicated to more Dhamma, less drama, we're going to have another sutta study tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., just like this morning, as well as Saturday morning. So please tune in. And this evening, we'll have a talk on, I believe, the 3 roots of suffering. And tomorrow evening, there will be another Bante who I'm going to show you right now. Bante, I got the wrong one.
This is Bante Sanata Vihari, who's visiting us from Los Angeles, and he'll be sharing some Dhamma with us while he's here with us.
And he also speaks Spanish, so he's also known for Dharma en Español. So if you are interested in Dhamma in Spanish, or you know anyone who's interested, maybe we can organize some live streams on that as well while Bhante is here. Thank you. All right. All right, so see you this evening, virtually, hopefully, at 7:30 p.m. And last announcement, on Sunday, we'll have an intensive day-long Vipassana retreat online. So we invite you all to participate with us. And if you have any questions or feedback, send us an email at info@buddhistinsights.com. And hope to see you soon. Last thing, Michael says hello from Monica. And Jen says, I'm thankful for this since my temple is closed.
Great. Yeah,
All right.
Please keep following us, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.